Daily Detroit is brought to you by the community. Support our work at patreon.com/dailydetroit.
Welcome to Monday, August 1st, 2022. I'm Jer Stays, and this is your Daily Detroit, sharing what to know and where to go in Southeast Michigan. We're back to a more normal schedule, Monday through Friday, as we've been able to catch up after the studio fire and almost everyone on the team dealing with something at the same time. Anyway, on today's show, we're going to take stock of Detroit City FC's season so far from an outside perspective and preview what's ahead for this Saturday in Tampa Bay. So John Morrissey will join me. Detroit City FC fans might know him as USL Tactics on Twitter. Now, some handles, big talk, little substance. But John, that's not the case. If you want some of the best breakdowns of the league DCFC is in, the USL Championship, you need to follow him. He's also a contributor to the USL Show podcast and writes for Backheeled, a wonderful site covering multiple levels of American soccer. John Morrissey, it's good to have you on Daily Detroit.
Yeah, really excited to be here. I appreciate the compliments and hoping I can provide some of that perspective.
Oh, I'm sure you can. So there's a bunch of questions that I have, but let's start with the upcoming match against the Tampa Bay Rowdies, a force in the Eastern Conference. We're going to Florida for a match August 6th. What do we have to look forward to?
When you think about expansion teams typically, and when you have the case in the Western Conference this season with what Monterrey is doing, it's a little bit of a slow burn. It'll take you a while to get used to the style of play, really establish yourself and start to earn those results. And DCFC broke the mold and really came out firing from the get-go. When you think about where they land in the East, for me, they're a solid playoff side. There's no doubt in my mind that they're going to be there. And I mean, if they get a game at Keyworth, watch out. But just being in that mix is a big achievement in year one. Tampa is a team that has been a stalwart across the USL for a few years now. They were in the title game last season. They would have been the year before, if not for the coronavirus. They're a perpetual contender. They're always at the top of the table. They've got some of those big names that have been raking in the goals, really being named to those like all league defensive teams. It's a really big test for Detroit. But if they've shown anything this year, it's that they're a tough out no matter who they're playing. The closest amalgamation of that one would be maybe the Louisville game in the Open Cup, where you're facing another kind of Eastern stalwart. So I think it's a good test for Detroit at this point.
Well, one of the things I love about the club, it's sometimes frustrating against lesser opponents, but we do tend to kind of stiffen up a bit when it comes to the top of the table.
That's right. And I think credit to Trevor James on that one, where he has a recognition that you have to be a little bit pragmatic when you're facing a Louisville, you're facing a Tampa Bay. And Tampa especially is just so sharp in how they attack. They've changed things around this year a little bit in terms of their tactical style, but they are just so fierce, so dominant on the ball. Detroit has proven time and time again that they can weather that storm and come out with results.
You know, and this kind of leads into a little bit of kind of where we sit in the league and other things. But, you know, if there's one thing that kind of frustrates me about this year's DCFC team is kind of our lack of go-to striker or like a go-to goal scorer. Like, it's frustrating for me because I see what Trevor James can do with the parts that he has and the defensive parts. And I can only imagine if Hopino had someone to cross to on a regular basis, what could happen.
Right. You just see so many of these moves develop where you can play it long into Hopino's feet and he's into space, or you're getting the wing backs like a Declan Wynn really involved in the game. And there's just no one in the box to finish that chance to hammer it home. If Detroit had someone like that up top, they would be really in great shape at the moment. And I'm interested to see how things change. Obviously, this past week, they signed Cy Goodard from the A-League Australia. Maybe he allows someone like Apato to get in the box a little bit more and be that number 9. But just with the lack of depth and resources that Detroit has had to this point, the fact that they've had such a, at least league average attack, right, is something that you should laud, because everything but that finisher in the box has clicked and really gone to a T so far.
Oh, 100%. And for perspective, we have been kind of running a little low when it comes to our bench, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, you mentioned Sai. Do you kind of have a background on him? Like, what can we expect out of somebody like him, or the potential of someone like him?
To be honest, I don't know anything about the Australian game, but I watched a little bit of the highlight tape on him just to get a sense. He seems like he'll play out on that left side, whether that's spelling Declan Wynn as a left wing back or being more of a wide forward. He can cross it in. He's a fairly speedy, technical player. I think he can draw opponents to those wide areas, maybe get them out of shape a little bit and open up the middle. And I think just having a true winger, which Detroit really hasn't used a ton outside of arguably Hopino, getting a little bit more variation in that sense, maybe just gives you a little bit of a different look from what this team has had. And I think that can only be a good thing, even if he's not going to light the league on fire and score a dozen goals.
Yeah. And Trevor James himself has talked about the idea that we don't have that key striker or a couple of like big goal scorers. So what we really have to do is look at this as a team effort.
And that's exactly it. And I think, if there's a player that encapsulates that whole approach, it would be Connor Rutz. I just wrote a piece about him a couple weeks ago. He's the consummate get back on defense, drop into the midfield, make things solid. But then he bursts into the forward line. He makes these late runs. He's linking play and transition from the defense in the midfield to the attackers. He encapsulates, he and the wingbacks really, Reese Williams, I haven't invoked yet, but he's excellent at that too, of putting in that shift defensively and then getting himself forward with all the energy in the world to make sure that Detroit can click and attack.
Oh, for sure. And, one player that I think is key in Detroit's offense, but I think people might not realize it, is Nate Steinwasser, because as the goalkeeper and with the tools that he has, he does a great job of helping getting the team to build up again, right? There's an attack that comes in, he's able to settle things down and then kind of get the build started all over again, which is an X factor that's way more than like just the clean sheets or the saves.
Yeah, and you can't undersell the importance of what he does in net. But if you think about goalie passing statistics, he's in the top 10, 20% of all USL keepers in terms of his forward passing, the sheer volume of passes he plays. Detroit is a team that really isn't terribly high possession, but they're going to be patient when they're building from the back. They keep the center backs involved. They're not afraid to play a back pass into Steinwasser. And then when the opponent finally has to get in and start pressing up, they're going to go long over you. And Steinwasser is really the crux of that style.
And it's really fun to watch, actually. Like, if you look at how that comes together, it's kind of entertaining. And, a lot of times I end up watching the games from behind one of the goal nets. And to see him work is just kind of fascinating.
There's always a certain excitement and a nervousness, I guess, when the goalie is on the ball. But Steinwasser has such a composure to him that you never feel like he's going to make some terrible error.
So what's one of the players that really surprised you with Rouge? Like, since you see all the teams and can kind of see how it fits into the greater picture, who's somebody who you were like, I didn't know this was going to be such a treat or such a good watch?
Well, I hate to say it now, but Devin Amu-Mensah just completely blew me away. He came in from day one and he had the composure, he had the technical defending ability of an all-league defender. And when I put out my mock halfway through the season, all-league teams, he was absolutely nailed on there. His ability on the ball, driving offense from the back, has been terribly impressive as well. There was a lot of talk in the preseason about this team being the NISA All-Stars or whatever, and people dismissing that as if it somehow meant that these players weren't up to snuff at the USL level. And I think Amu-Mensah is case number one as to that being a really terrible misreading of the situation. He is just such a great player in terms of every skill set you want out of a central defender. He fits the system perfectly, and he has just blown me away. You're going to miss him for the rest of the year, right? But yeah. He's done so much.
He definitely leaves a large hole. And I think he also surprised some people here because he came from the Michigan Stars, kind of like, it's not really a rival, more of like a I don't know, disliked little brother kind of
Yeah, annoying
situation.
little brother, right?
Right. And I think people kind of were surprised, but I mean, there were definitely a couple players on the Stars. And frankly, as much as Nisa as a league, we could debate all of that till all day. And there's tons of people on Twitter who will do that. That's not really my bag. But the content of Nisa's top players, they've shown that they can really, really do pretty well. And in fact, frankly, I see more parity in US soccer than I think a lot of people would see. You have the US Open Cup where a USL Championship team is in the final, which is super cool to see. You had a League One team do really well. I think that that's an important lesson too for fans coming to this, that the US soccer world, it isn't as linear as like Major League Baseball or the NHL or, things like that. It's a lot less linear in its talent pool.
Right. And it's so hard to look at a team like the Michigan Stars and pick out the player who could make it to that next level. But you could think about Michigan. You think about every team in like USL League 2, for instance. There are studs waiting to be discovered at all of these levels. And because you don't have the data, because it's so hard to track these hundreds of semi-professional games, it's really difficult for players to make the leap. But at the same time, you referenced League One and the Open Cup, where Omaha gave it a real go against Minnesota United of MLS, a team with, highly paid millionaires on their squad versus lowly Omaha. It's the magic of the sport in this country where there really is, you hit it on the head, that sense of parity in these leagues.
It's a lot of fun to watch, and I also think that there's going to be a lot of shifts. Like I've noticed from the league too, that there's almost this push toward maybe even moving some players in a European way instead of up through the MLS ranks, but say, hey, we're going to get players and we're going to make, transfer fees and such off of taking these players to Europe. And frankly, with DCFC picking up Psy, like that's an international pickup. Like I love that the USL is starting to interface really well with like the rest of the world, because I feel like there hasn't been as much of that with the MLS. And as somebody who watches both Premier League and some MLS, there's definitely, like, to me anyway, there's a gap in talent there. And I think the USL is well positioned to kind of fill in and kind of level up what American soccer can be.
Yeah, so at Backfield, we just had an interview with Jake Edwards, who is obviously the head of the USL. And he was very much talking up exactly what you're mentioning, the idea of the USL integrating itself into the global soccer landscape. And implicit in this discussion was that MLS has not really done that. Obviously, they bring in those big names. You get a Beckham, you get a Gareth Bale, but they have so many Byzantine roster rules. They've got that singular structure that makes machinations in the transfer market so difficult. Whereas USL operates like almost every other soccer league in the world. And you've seen the benefits, I think, especially recently with these youth products who have shown their potential and moved on. Whether that's Jonathan Gomez at Louisville going over to Real Sociedad, Orange County just selling Kobe Henry over to France for upwards of $700,000. Being able to be a talent pool for the world is dually beneficial because it extends the reputation of the USL, and it also is a real source of revenue. For a team like Orange County to get that much money for one player who, let's be real, he played about 15 to 20 games in that uniform, that's massive for the club. That could pay their entire salary for a year and a half. So if the USL can do more of that and get these clubs engaged in the world market, it's only a good thing.
Some listeners may know this, some may not, about how much Detroit City has invested in development leagues, all the way down to the youth level. And I don't know how, and forgive my ignorance because I'm just not as familiar. I'm the new guy here. But that investment in all the way from youth all the way up into your U teams, or what is it? I believe it's U23s and things like that. To see these investments go up, if you can build that kind of talent long term, that's going to pay off for the club in spades.
That's exactly right. I think the first example that would pop to mind in that is El Paso, and especially this season. They're a team, for people who don't know, who have had a real lot of roster churn this season, lots of injuries, lots of players kind of just up and leaving. I mentioned a couple of those youth sales. They sold Diego Luna, a star midfielder, 18, 19 years old, to MLS for a big fee. And they filled the gaps with these teenagers from their academy. They've had 4 or 5 guys who are 18, 19 years old get regular minutes. That's amazing to see that El Paso, who's existed as a club for about that long, immediately getting in with an academy and coming up with these players who are locally grown, who are getting the chance to shine in a professional context. You're extending your reach within the city of El Paso and you're getting better results on the field, and it's going to be profitable at the end of the day. That's the goal for the USL as a whole.
Well, yeah, because it seems to me that the USL, and I mean, no league is obviously perfect, but it seems to me that the USL is more focused than the MLS on community clubs.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, Detroit obviously is one of the standouts in that regard already. But I think that the scale of the USL, the fact that it's a little bit less corporate, a little bit more personal within these markets, allows you to reach out and interact in a really personal way where, I mean, even the player tenures at these certain clubs aren't that long, but people can get a real connection because these are sort of homegrown, homespun opportunities, and they're institutions that let you get close up and engage. And I think that's what's so fun and unique about it all.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've had our signings from different places, but we also have a large contingent of players, and Nate's one of them. I think about Francis and some others that have either state connections from the state, went to University of Michigan or something like that. Like, there is something like that. And as I kind of go through the rest of the league, other teams have that kind of energy too, and it's kind of great to see.
The U.S. Open Cup in Sacramento are top of mind for me right now. But Matt LaGrassa, who's from that area, who put in a really big shift in that game, that's a Sacramento product. League One just launched a team in Fresno, the Central Valley Fuego, and they got a couple really solid USL Championship level players to come out there because they're from Fresno. So just seeing that sort of thing where players are motivated to give up opportunities because they can come home and connect with the community, that's the magic of this level of the sport.
Yeah. So we're getting about 2/3 of the way into the season now. Maybe we can talk a little bit about, as an outsider, what's kind of you've seen the impact that Detroit City has had on the USL, because every team brings something special, you know? So what have you seen that Detroit City brings to the USL that's kind of special?
I think that, I know I sort of hinted at it, but the passion of that home fan base, the fact that if you're an Eastern Conference team, there probably isn't another atmosphere in the conference that is more intimidating to go play a game at. It raises the game in terms of the fandoms everywhere else, where you want to have that level of passion. People like to rag on Detroit for being very online in terms of the fan base and a little bit raucous in that regard. But I think it kind of raises everybody's game in terms of that competitiveness. And I think in an on-the-field standpoint, they've adapted really well to the league. Obviously, they're playing a somewhat similar kind of 3-5-2-ish formation and style. But, I mean, that is something that you've seen a little bit less of in the East in terms of those back threes. And there's been more of that this year. So Detroit has already been a bit of a proving ground for things tactically, and that's a credit to Trevor James, but it's a credit to the influence of the club overall.
You know, on the air in the past, I have joked that Keyworth, especially in inclement weather, can also be called Winterfell. Like a Game of Thrones, we even have the wall. Like, we have the Great White Wall. We got the whole 9 yards, you know? So, like, the Northern Guard is more than appropriate, in my opinion.
No, I mean, that's about right.
You know, you mentioned Trevor James, and he strikes me as like a special coach. Like, even with the news stories about him being like, I think it was Rod Stewart's coach.
That's right, yes.
Which is crazy. Like, I need to Photoshop a meme of the most interesting man of the world and stick Trevor's head on it. And I think I'm probably going to do that after this conversation. But if you're a casual fan, because I look at Detroit City, we kind of have fans that have been with us for many years. Like, I remember going to games at Cass Tech High School in whatever league we were in. Like, the first time I discovered the team, I was partying at a place called the TV Lounge, you know, with the Unz music. And I was like, what's going on? There's a soccer game? And like, I wandered out and I was hooked, right? It was absolutely magical.
Sure.
But Trevor James brings a lot to this team that I think my lucky star is that we have him. But I think that like he's really like a top-notch coach. And a lot of times I look at what he does on the field, I'm like, why isn't this guy like in the MLS or in Premier League or something?
That's the question at this point, isn't it? I mean, looking at his track record, everything he's done in the game across the globe, it's really incredible that he's ended up in Detroit. And that's not a knock against Detroit. It's just the fact that Trevor James has a really impressive CV. I grew up in Indianapolis. I was around when the Indy 11 got started. And he was involved with Indy for a long while as an assistant. I think he had maybe a couple weeks or months as the interim manager. He's just a really solid soccer mind. And I think you can't underrate what he's done with Detroit. And obviously, I mean, you had Ben Pierman in before that, and he's absolutely tearing the league apart with Memphis. So you're blessed with good coaches here, but still.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and Ben laid a lot of foundation. Like, we cannot take away from, the influence that Ben Pierman has had. And I mean, honestly, it's a credit to ownership to get good coaches like that, because over the years, I've seen a lot of, like, not at Detroit, but with teams we played or covering various leagues, I think ownership sometimes shortchanges just how important it is to invest in a coach that, frankly, we've got limited resources right now for a variety of reasons. I think that's going to grow over time. But, he's taken kind of like whatever cards he's been dealt at the table and been like, yeah, I'm going to bluff you and I'm going to, beat you with this hand that may not have all the cards that you'd want to have at this point.
Right. There was that kind of early season stretch when Detroit was coming out, and you could argue whatever, that it wasn't the strongest opposition, but they were winning every week. And for me, it was this beauty of Trevor James would make these small tweaks in the second half, week in and week out, that would turn the game on its head and make sure Detroit got the win. And that's something you just don't see in this league a lot. I think and certainly you've got some great managers, don't get me wrong, but I think there's this tendency to be a bit egg-headed, a bit slow to change. And Trevor James has the humility and the experience to realize that, sure, my initial game plan did fine, but if I do X, Y, Z, it'll get me the win. And that pragmatism is something that you cannot underrate.
But I mean, now that we know that he's been on a Rod Stewart record, does he have anything else to prove?
I mean, I think that's he peaked way too early, honestly.
Looking at your crystal ball, I mean, do you think that Detroit City right now is pretty much a lock for the playoffs? Do you think we're still on the edge? I know a lot of people here would love to see a home game. I know I would, but I also know that we've got some work to do in the stretch. Like, where do you see us now, and what are a tweak or two we could make to maybe improve our chances?
I do the playoff odd calculation thing, and I've got Detroit with an 88% chance of getting in. And I mean, if I was a gambling man, I would bet the house on Detroit making the playoffs. The home playoff game is going to be a bit of a tougher ask, just because with only 7 teams in, not that many getting to host the games. And if you look at, I think Tampa and Louisville are locks to finish ahead of Detroit. Memphis probably the same way. Pittsburgh and Birmingham both have really rounded into form nicely in the past couple of weeks, where Detroit for me is sitting 6th, but it's very neck and neck where they could get up to maybe 4th. And knock on wood, if they really round into form, get up to that 3rd place and assure themselves that ability to host at Keyworth. But I would be safe in the knowledge that this absolutely is a playoff side.
And what's a couple of gaps, whether it's this season or maybe even looking towards, next season? Like if you were, playing whatever it is, Football Manager or whatever, and you said, hey, there's a thing or two that you would want to see this team add because we got the roster space. It's just about making the deal happen. What would you love to see for a DCFC that would scare the pants off you?
We talked about it, getting that real number 9, that striker who can score goals for days up there in the lineup would be a huge acquisition for this team. If there was one more spot, I do think that you could afford to bring in a central midfielder. And that's nothing against, Maxi Rodriguez for me would be nailed into the squad. I think he's completely brilliant. And I like what you get from a Dunwell or a Diop. Someone who can combine the defensive solidity and the safety and passing that those two provide and give you a little bit more of an offensive spark in the same mold as Maxi really do it all number 8 type of midfielder would be fantastic for this team. I'm completely sold on everything they're doing, from goalie to defense to those wing backs. But just getting that extra shade of creativity while still maintaining the defensive structure, that would put Detroit over the top.
Wow. Well, that's something I would love to see. And there was something you tweeted a while ago that Detroit City has a magic about them. And I've never heard it clearer or understood it clearer covering the team, that's exactly what it is. I think that's one of the reasons why I worked in behind the scenes doing sports stuff with a lot of pro teams and college teams. And I have not seen a magic like Detroit City FC since, like our Red Wings, were Stanley Cup competitors back like in the late 90s. Like, it's a special thing with this club and with the fans, which is part of what makes the magic of the place.
That's absolutely it. I mean, I mentioned that stretch where Detroit was just coming up with these little innovations every week. They were rocking it at Keyworth. It was so refreshing to see when, I don't want to call anyone out specifically, but like, you watch a Miami game in front of 300 people in an empty football stadium, it's a little bit of a different feel from seeing what Detroit is doing. And I think that's so refreshing. And to get it from an expansion side, amazing.
Oh, yeah. And I'm looking forward to rivalries building. Like, I like the idea of us being competitive and it being like a constant thing with Louisville, Tampa Bay. Like, culturally, I think a good option. I don't know where they would land it, like if they would land west or east, but like a New Orleans, because of all the French ties between Detroit and NOLA. And like, there's so many, like, we're Le Rouge. Like, there's so many things. Like, I think about some great rivalries that we really could have.
That's so fantastic about the USL generally. And there's that strong Midwest presence too. Like, you've got an Indy, you've got a Louisville. You could argue either way for Pittsburgh, I guess. But I mean, what if the league expands to Milwaukee or something like that? I think the richness of the regional sense of things, like you see it in the Southwest already in a lot of ways with the USL. But Detroit as an anchor for that Midwestern growth is fantastic. And it would bolster the rivalries for sure.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And, with USL growing, I assume they need to get more presence on the lower leagues. But do you think that promotion relegation is in the cards eventually if there's enough teams?
It's something that the league has talked about for a long time. I do think that it's going to happen eventually. For me, the barometer of getting League One and the Championship into the 30s numerically as far as teams go is a really lofty aim. Whether it ends up there or not, I do think that Pro Rel will happen at some point. It's different when you consider it with MLS because of the TV contracts and all of the corporate tie-ups that they've got in that league. Whereas, let's be honest, League One and the Championship, it doesn't matter to the average fan or the average corporate sponsor or ESPN Plus which league you're in. So Pro Rel doesn't hurt from that ownership perspective because it's not affecting your bottom line in a real meaningful way. And I think the attention, the competition that it would add is enough of a make weight that it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think about, as a Forest fan, like this year having something kind of extra to watch. That it's like there's a whole nother dimension of, sure, I watched Premier League and a Forest was below, and then to see that kind of come up, I feel like that's a great way also to bring in different cities and different places. And, you see, like we talked about Omaha, like, it would be great to see, even if it wasn't a Pro Rel situation, like it would be great to see Omaha in a friendly, wouldn't that be great?
Yeah. There's been talk of, I think they've nicknamed it like the Leagues Cup, where you would just have a competition that's just League One, League Two, and the Championship. Getting a little bit more cross-promotion and competition between the leagues would be fantastic.
Yeah, and I think it would kind of scratch that itch in the in-between time while they kind of like figure out the technicals. Because, I mean, admittedly, there's a lot of technicals to all that.
Just the financial side, getting the sporting arrangements, changing the conferences every year, that's a lot to think about. Just having an interim solution, like we've mentioned, would be so much fun.
Oh, yeah, I would definitely watch. And, I do love the Northern Guard and I love all the things that we do. But I got to admit that Omaha having their supporters group called the Parliament makes me smile.
Yeah, with that, I mean, the whole owl branding, just fantastic.
Oh, yeah. I think that's part of the things I love about it. Well, John Morrissey, you're a brilliant tactician. It's great to see all your stuff at USL Tactics, writer at Backheeled, covering the USL. Thank you for giving me and our audience so much perspective on the league, on what's ahead for our test for Tampa Bay, which I'm really excited to see and kind of see how we stand up. And I appreciate your time and all that you do.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to be here. It's been so much fun to interact with you, with the Detroit fan base, because of the passion that they bring. So being able to come on today was a real treat for me.
And we're done for today. A little bit incoming attractions. Newsweek contributor Steve Freese will be joining me for some local election and political coverage this week. After all, Election Day is August 2nd. Also, I'm going to try to get my hands on that new Cherry Verner's stuff for the Friday show with Devin. Give me a heads up at dailydetroit@gmail.com if you have a lead or any suggestions for the show. With that, I'm Jer Stays. Remember that you are somebody, and I'll see you around Detroit.